Hi, I'm Philip Myers, author of Squished. Thank you for joining me here today. I want to read the opening chapter of Squished that introduces the amazing story of my 2.5 years working with Jacqueline Kennedy, researching a true Cold War espionage story that turned into a murder story and even ended up overlapping with the JFK assassination. It was an unbelievable human experience for me. The resulting book, Squished, Jackie Kennedy, Espionage, Murder, and Me, is available on Amazon in both paperback and ebook. So I hope you'll be intrigued enough that you'll order it, of course. But here we go. Let me tell you how this story gets going. The afternoon in her apartment had something of the feel of a wake, albeit a very small and private one. For once, Jackie's piercing eyes were focused on someone else. I was able to look around her private library as I hadn't previously to see the family pictures. Her copy of JFK's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Profiles in Courage, sat on the shelf beside me, and the snapshots of the grandkids were scotch-taped to a mirror. It was an incredibly intimate experience. If I hadn't been living it, I probably wouldn't have believed it was all for real. It was Jackie who introduced the idea of the murder in our project. When I first explained to her how I had stumbled upon the true Cold War espionage tale involving her friend, Leonid, she said to me, "You're going to end up squished in a trash can somewhere." It took my breath away. It seemed unbelievable that I was digging into the murder of a close friend of hers, and it was even more bizarre when it became clear that there was overlap with the JFK assassination and the question of potential Russian involvement in it. She took the project out of Doubleday, the only freelance book project she did in her 20 years as an editor, and she did it from home. That way, she could keep tighter control over what information might spill out. One sunny fall afternoon in 1992, I found myself sitting in the library of her penthouse in New York, watching her share memories of a murdered Russian who had spied for the U.S. with his best friend, a Russian nuclear physicist who was also part of the group. Jackie and Gulia, who was sitting across from me that afternoon, both had loved Leonid. Gulia and Leonid had been best friends in college in Leningrad. Jackie and Leonid, the murdered spy master, had been intensely close after he went to work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the early 1970s. They met about a decade after the JFK assassination and shortly after the death of Aristotle Onassis, her second husband. Leonid was her primary collaborator on the book she edited about an exhibit at the Met called In the Russian Style. Jackie and Leonid's friendship continued for almost 20 years until his death in 1990. When Leonid wasn't making trips back to the Soviet Union on a fake passport to buy arms for Iraq from Russia, he was stopping by her apartment on his way home from work. Gulia first told me the story of the 1950s plot to warn the U.S. of a Soviet nuclear first strike on the first of my 58 trips to Russia. At that point, there was no suggestion that Leonid had been murdered and nothing about his arms dealing for Iraq in the late 1980s. He died in a car crash in 1990 in France. Everything thereafter in our research, including psychics we consulted, indicated that Jackie was right about the murder. At that point, we didn't know who ordered the hit and how far the story went. Jackie and I were sure there was still something very large we hadn't uncovered, and it proved to be right. The research ultimately would uncover a likely Soviet mole high in the U.S. government, who had served as chairman of the Democratic Party, as well as ambassador to the Soviet Union under George Herbert Walker Bush. The mole apparently had 2 murders on his hands. When it began to be apparent that the story we were researching, Gulia and Leonid's story, touched on the JFK assassination, I thought Jackie would bail out of the book project, but she didn't. She was fearless, she was free, and she was very, very smart. There's an odd closeness that develops when someone involves you in the quest to solve the murder of a loved one. Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis told me she loved the spy master Leonid Tarasuk after he moved to New York from Leningrad in the early 1970s. As things progressed between us to being on a first-name basis and my freedom to call Jackie at home, it was clear that she had become profoundly engaged in solving the mystery. And to our mutual surprise, the investigation of Leonid's murder linked it to the murder of her husband, the president. It took me a while to figure out how my life was similar to that of the former First Lady. She had been married to a president and later to the richest man in the world. I was a Methodist preacher's son from small-town Pennsylvania. On the face of it, we were not 2 peas in a pod. And yet we were. And the connection finally made sense to me. The JFK assassination had been a bolt out of the blue. It shaped and colored the rest of her life and how people reacted to her. My bolt out of the blue was a hidden tale of Cold War espionage that fell on me without warning while I was on a business trip to the Soviet Union in 1991. Suddenly, I knew spies. Suddenly, I was in the middle of a hunt for the Soviet mole in the US government. And suddenly, I was researching the murder of Leonid, the spy master, with the woman who had been his intimate friend. Gulia and Leonid were motivated to betray the Soviet Union in order to save the world from the insanity of a nuclear first strike. Jackie and I were motivated to find the truth about it all, no matter where it led. Squished is the story of how our bolts from the blue tied us together. And ultimately, it is the story about who made those 2 murders happen. I hope you'll get the book and read the rest of it. And you can send me questions and comments at Phil Myers Author, all one word, Phil Myers Author, on Facebook. Thank you so much.